While editing my psychology games essay, I was very deliberate on selecting examples of the genre. It wasn't straight from the start that I even thought to present a timeline of the 2010s, also considering the Scarecrow segment from 2009's Batman Arkham Asylum, and being very spoiled for choice in 2018, with Gris and Stories Untold eventually getting cut from the final edit as well. But about a week or two before release, I think, hey, don't I already have a game on my shelf about thoughts and feelings? Yeah, Balan Wonderworld. Should probably throw in a reference for that one. But who can blame me for forgetting that little aspect, even so early in my first playthrough? For a game that was heavily hated and mocked in equal measure, I only saw one positive review at the very beginning, but that one was enough for me to check it out with relative haste. Granted, that is becoming my new measurement for anything hated en masse online. Only one moderately well-presented praise is needed for me to give that thing the time of day. I may have come and gone a few times with Balan Wonderworld since, but I never once genuinely regretted my initial purchase. I would pick it up on occasion to explore the environments and character-centric snippets of plot, but then, after a few days, get tired with the gameplay loop of collecting 5 copies of costumes at a time, running past the enemies toward a certain puzzle, then running back to the dressing room when one costume didn't help after all and I needed to try another one. Those are the arguments that everyone knows about, though, the ones discussed to death by taking the game at face value. I'm going to dig a little deeper because I actually took the time to finish most of the game and explore those deeper layers. Although, to begin with, I confess I feel like an idiot in hindsight, because my psychology essay concluded with the hope that other games wouldn't feel the need for major traumatic inner conflicts all the time. So when this game actually did that for me, I turned around to do what internet culture always does and hyper-focused on the law. Backstories. Now, I didn't get too deep into that. The worst was Armchair diagnosing the airplane boy for having ADHD, the madcap energy of his cutscenes suggesting that he was unable to slow down and study all the aerodynamic research that already exists. But yeah, that was probably just comedic effect to give tonal variety. You see, once my head was out of my ass, I didn't feel that the lack of dialogue or simplicity of stakes were bad for this adventure. But I understood why that was the common opinion. On the one hand, these stories are purposefully mundane and simple for anyone with a similar life experience to empathize with. All honesty, it was actually the loss of my own parents, not as simultaneously, what led me to this ongoing obsession with mental health. So Ivan's story did hit closer to home than I would have liked. But otherwise, if you can't empathize, they may come off as too vague, and really that's more of a you problem. And a me problem. I was happy to beat the snot out of Cal Suresh, and it was a sigh of relief when he didn't just go on to keep winning trophies. I was genuinely scared of that one. I can also recognize that less dialogue means less translation costs, and the fact that most of the storytelling still comes through from a Japanese company to a mostly Western audience is nothing to dismiss. I honestly think most of the confusion complaints were stupid and overblown, regardless of language barriers. But there is one issue I have that cannot be excused by translation, because they did translate the musical numbers. Now, a big element of the game's presentation is that the titular world is a trans-dimensional theatre house, dance sequences as the conclusion of every boss fight, and the lyrics with subtitles included, perfectly spelling out the intended message that everyone was bitching about not understanding. And that was because the translated songs were completion rewards only. I'm sorry to be an arrogant English speaker, but I guarantee that this was the perfect solution to easing a lot of the public backlash if the English versions had been used up front. I don't have an issue with the dance sequences or the music itself. I mean, the rest of the soundtrack is phenomenal. I wish the game was more theatrical. But I would have preferred if I could understand the songs without the need to collect all trophies from a stage, and especially perfect those goddamn infuriating Balan bout segments. I mean, I'm pretty great at them by now, but I'm not proud of that. Yeah, again, the actual gameplay is a very weak link, but so much surrounding it is incredibly fascinating to study and think about. So I guess it's a video game that shouldn't necessarily be played, but still needs to be shared. One argument I saw equates the game to a theme park that you should run through and enjoy the whirl of colours, and another one suggests it should be taken slower to really delve into the platforming and puzzling. And the funny thing is, I agree with both perspectives, which also contributes to how polarizing the whole experience feels. Still, with all these unique opinions of my own, I wasn't too sure if it was worth me making a whole video just for Balan. I was mostly worried that I would keep comparing its dreamlike presentation to Alice in Wonderland. Not just for the same style over gameplay complaint I had with American McGee's Alice, but particularly the feeling for level 6 and level 7 being literally another land of chess. Though, just like how both chess lands were based on the board game and not actually one ripping off the other, the concept of exploring someone's mind in media is both incredibly specific to every one of us and yet universally relatable, with enough overlap to carry some elements between interpretations. As abundant as Balan criticism is to find on the internet, in response, the few positive opinions out and about do their best to express their arguments nice and clearly. I cannot say as much for the spiritual predecessor series Knights and its unfavourable entry Journey of Dreams. I did ensure that I go through the games blind at first and then look into other opinions, but as I said, not a lot of discussion to find. Thus why I felt okay to produce this video. Less fear of reviewer dibs, you see. A major element of gameplay here is flying around the world, which was in fact one of the last available power-ups in Wonderworld, requiring an entire side quest of feeding and breeding furry creatures to unlock it. Maybe intended there as an Easter egg reference to this series, it makes my particular experience feel like continuation of mechanics, whereas I'm sure a long-term follower of the developers could see it more as 2 steps backwards instead. What I consider backwards, though, are the controls of flying. Being a Wii title released about a year into the console's life cycle, I shouldn't be too harsh about use of the motion control technology, blah blah blah. Actually, I didn't mind using the Wiimote to aim forward and casually glide along. It's free and calming, just like flying in a dream should be. The problems come in the second any challenge is introduced at all. Flying with precision, speed, time limits, the sudden reverse direction if my aim goes out of bounds, the myriad of obstacles that can also rebound you the wrong way. Gah! There are a couple regular platforming levels that don't require the aiming, which are enjoyable, but fairly short and far between. I found the male campaign significantly more frustrating, to the point that I finished the girl's story before even completing the first land for the boy. and I don't understand why when a lot of the challenges are interchangeable and/or repeated. But yes, we have the choice between two player characters with their own intro stories, like the ones from Balan, though the levels aren't built out of sports equipment or musical instruments, only in the memory forest right before the end. Why wasn't this called the woodwind section? Both Will and Helen get 3 locations of their own that vaguely represent who they are, if you squint a bit. Will is more than happy to explain his areas as stuff he did with his father, which is fine, but I still don't know Helen's reasoning behind Aqualand, especially when Will got the dedicated level as a dolphin. And a speedboat. The recurring theme between the two children seems to be parental disappointment, so another video game trend that's been going nuts in the last decade. Like I said, Will loves spending time with his dad, but when the dad goes away for business, Will has no social life to fill the void. There's some talk of him being lonely and unable to trust others, but when the end cutscene just throws us straight into soccer finals, I think it was supposed to be implied that he never officially joined the team until after this game's events. Helen's problem is the complete opposite, having a social life, but then guilting herself over not spending more time with her mother and their violin recital. We don't get as much insight on the mother, if she was the controlling type or anything, but Helen is made out that self-confidence is what she lacks, being less talkative than Will for most of the game. The goal of both campaigns is to collect the Idia orbs that represent core human values. You begin with courage already, otherwise neither kid would be a protagonist, obviously. Then collect purity, intelligence and growth from each world, and finally the Idia of hope by completing every level to C rank, which I did not accomplish because I am hopeless. Oddly, in all playthroughs, Helen is forced to lose her courage Idia right before the final boss and get saved by Will, but Will doesn't lose his courage when you play as him, even though Helen coming in to save him would have been his chance to trust in someone else, I would have thought from a storytelling view. I don't see a point in Helen losing her power because it doesn't come up again, and I'm hoping it's not just a case of sexism. But what's my opinion of the game overall? Don't get me wrong, we are much closer to the human condition in a world of dreams rather than magic. 2 personal conflicts instead of 14 allow plenty room for some depth and nuance, and I love the symbolism of locations like a deserted carnival or a fragile palace. But there's not a lot of connection between these worlds or to the main hobbies of the children. Jumping from one scenery aesthetic to another is very dreamlike, I suppose, but most of it blurred together amongst the buildings and beaches. I struggled to remember it all once I'd finished playing. Maybe if I had been allowed to explore it more instead of running around in circles. So by the end of this playthrough, it's not looking too good for the franchise as a whole. The psychology titles that I focused on last video chronologically spanned between 1999 and 2005. 4 other considerations I had, one on GameCube and the rest on PC, were first released in 2002, 1998, 1997 and October of 1996. The first appearance of the Knights franchise, Into Dreams, came to the Sega Saturn in 1996 with its Japanese release in July. So, granting another obscure game hiding in the history records, or the first 300 pages of 1001 video games you must play before you die, This could be the earliest example we have of the genre, and now the name of my essay is a big fat lie. Having said that, it is the weakest case of psychoanalysis in this video, and I claim fault of that. Like, what did I expect for an earlier game story? Our two main children, Elliot and Clarice, are just Will and Helen 0.5, minus the parents and replacing soccer and violin with basketball and singing. We don't even get to see the intro clips upon starting the game unless we go straight to the movie theatre. Locations are mostly simple biomes of forest and snow and desert, but with subtitles like the ideal and the consciousness and the confusion. Okay, I agree with that one. The sequel definitely wanted us to consider the children's deeper emotions because we got to hear them talk about it. But a franchise can only work in one chronological direction. Before DLC, that is. Hell, I didn't need to read the instruction manual because I already knew the story. Journey of Dreams seems to have been intended as a narrative game first. Nights into Dreams is first and foremost an arcade game, as was the style at the time. We don't get multiple challenges, we get multiple courses for the same challenge. The Idia orbs are not rewards for progression, they are the collectibles that get stolen from us at the start of every level. Each location is divided into smaller segments, but we actually get a map to slow down and see the whole area. I even remember these areas better because I took the time to earn C rank. And on the other hand, if we run out of time, we are not forced to begin again immediately. We drop out of nights and can continue on foot, without slowing down or this egg will eat you. But it's something for the exploration that I desired, and I may be spoiled with a keyboard over original Saturn controls, but oh my god, flying is so much better than Wii. Compared to the other two titles, I've already run out of things to say for this one. Besides, it did excel where those latter two fell short. It's a fun game as a game, the actual moment-to-moment experience. Similar to how a dream should feel. Yes, for the second time in this experiment, I've had to pull my head out of my ass and accept that dreams don't have to mean anything. Sure, you can wake up, vaguely remember the parts that stood out to you, and construct what you want them to mean, just like horoscopes. But while it's happening, it's just you, existing in brain matter and nothing else outside of it. Could that not also be the greatest compliment to give to a video game? It wasn't until I sat down to write this outro that I realized how amazingly I had lucked into the perfect analogy all the way back at the start. Remember how I referenced 2 positive reviews of Balan Wonderworld among all the criticism? Well, they both apply to how I feel about each entry of the Knights franchise respectively. The first game was a rush of colours to get involved with and stop thinking, and the gameplay of the second should have been slower paced so that I could appreciate all the smaller details. But I really have no clue what this means for any future projects from the development team, if that possibility still exists. The 3 star faces of the first game are actually split between the official sequel and the spiritual successor, so maybe a reunion would be helpful. But honestly, I just think there's too many individual elements working against each other that one single perfect game in the imaginative, low-trauma, multi-character psychology genre from these particular minds might be impossible anyway. But one can still dream for such a game. One can still dream.